Hey, Walter Sorrells back with more tips for the knife maker. Today, an insider's view into how the sausage is made. We'll check out this, the building of my latest Tactics Armory knife, the Shadow 2. So, quick background, Tactics Armory is basically me, and these days, I'm basically Tactics Armory. What I'm getting at is that there was a time when I spent most of my day forging Japanese swords, and Tactics Armory was kind of a side project. So now it's my primary focus, and that means mainly tactical and EDC, hard use, semi-production type fixed blades. Anyway, this knife right here is the very first, or at least it's one of the first knives I ever made for Tactics Armory, and it is definitely the very first design. And this may have actually been the first prototype of the first design. Anyway, point is, I carried this knife day in and day out for 2-3 years. I got to know it very well, all its strengths and weaknesses, and I think it's really the most versatile size blade that I make. It's big enough, but it's not so big that it gets in the way. You can put it in your belt. Very easy to carry. So I love this knife. Probably my favorite design ever in functional terms, but frankly, it's a little bit bare bones. Some may even say under-designed. So I wanted to keep the concept, but I wanted to give it a little more flair, a little more distinctiveness while preserving and frankly even improving the functionality of the original design. So the result is this right here, the Shadow 2. And today I'm going to kind of pull back the curtain a little and talk about some of the challenges of making this particular knife. Now, the first thing to understand is that this knife is made to be built in quantity. Quantity by my standards is a very small maker anyway. I'm not talking about thousands of them. So it's designed on computer and manufactured in part on my CNC machine. Now, I started my career as a Japanese sword guy. I know how to do this and this and this and this. Been doing all this stuff for decades. And if you can do these things well, you can produce magnificent blades. But you may find this hard to believe, but I can charge like 10 grand for a sword and still basically lose money on it. So even with fairly simple knives, selling them at a reasonable price point, you cannot be doing this sort of thing. I mean, you can't even make a knife in China that way and turn a profit. So there's always going to be some aspect of machine work involved. For a long time, the central tool in the making of American individual maker knives has been this, the belt grinder. Now, it may not look like it, but it is a very high-skill tool, probably the hardest thing that knife makers have to learn how to use. It's also grimy, makes a lot of dust that's going to wreck your lungs over time if you aren't really scrupulous about wearing a respirator. It's hard on your back, your joints. I know, but that's not my point. My point is that I'm trying to bring a high-quality product to market at a reasonable price. So my goal with Tactics Armory is to squeeze as much of the less skilled part of the grinding out of the process as I can so that I leave only the most high-skill parts to the grinder and then do as much as possible with CNC. Now, it looks like this is pretty easy. You just stick a piece of metal in here, you press a green button, you put your feet up. But, in fact, figuring out all the fixturing, the tools, the tool paths, how everything fits together, all this stuff, going back and forth and back and forth, back and forth to make everything line up, it's very interesting, it's very challenging, and it's very complex work. There are just a lot of details to get right. Hey, by the way, if you like the looks of the Shadow 2, you can pre-order them at a discounted price from tacticsarmory.com. I've already got the main batch in progress, so they should be ready for shipment, pretty quickly. But after that, if there are any left after the pre-orders ship, those will go on sale at the normal price. Oh, one other thing I should mention is for those of you who are watching my video last week, I'm giving away a knife to maybe a couple knives even to folks who come by the Tactics Armory website and sign up for my mailing list there. That'll let you keep up with what's going on at Tactics Armory and some of my thoughts on knife making and stuff that's going on in the shop and stuff like that. So anyway, tacticsarmory.com. I'm just going to grab a couple names out of that list of people in the next couple of weeks, and they'll get a free knife. Just to clarify, I'm not giving every single person that signs up for the mailing list a knife, obviously. I'm just going to grab a couple names out of the list, and I'll announce who gets the free knives probably in 2 or 3 weeks. Anyway, here's where I've landed. I make all my knives on one of these things. This is called a Pearson Pallet, which is part of a whole system that fits into the CNC machine. Before I ever make the first piece of each knife, I have to design how to hold it on the machine. Mills just don't like little flat pieces of metal, so special care has to be taken here. And so for each knife I make, I have to produce its own fixture. They all have their own little dimensions and quirks and stuff, and each of those has to be milled into this fixture. And then each fixture has a separate position for each operation that I do on the knife. If I were doing zillions of these, I'd set it up so that you had 10 fixtures and each one does a specific thing and you could swap them out also. But anyway, that's not how I do it. Here's how it works on this particular pallet. First, I drill and then bore several holes to thousandths of an inch tolerances. Then I move the drilled stock to a second location using the holes that I drilled to hold it down with precision-sized shoulder bolts. You know, I've experimented with water jetting parts, lasering parts, and doing 100% of the parts on the CNC machines. Right now, I'm on the 100% CNC train, but I'm not married to it. I might go back to lasering the bulk of the parts later. We'll see. It's slower for me. And each one of these little tools costs between 10 and $100 depending, and they wear out a lot faster than you'd think. So you got to factor all that into the process. But doing them all myself on the CNC machine gives me more control over the design, the pace of the work. You know, if I control it, I'm not waiting on somebody else to do something, or maybe they, don't do it to a standard that I want, whatever. As long as I'm controlling it, it's just me. After milling the profile, you'll see that I still have this tab at the tip of the knife. That's so I can hold the tip of the knife when I'm cutting the bevels, so it won't chatter, wobble, bend, do all this kind of horrible stuff that ruins the knife. The next part of the process is the trickiest one. Here I'm milling the bevels. Again, over the years I've tried a jillion different ways of doing this. Among the things that you're balancing here are producing symmetrical bevels from side to side of the blade, producing good surface finish, producing proper angles and taper, milling them reasonably quickly and without burning up tons of ridiculously expensive carbide tools. I mean, there's a lot to it. And if you don't solve all of these problems to your satisfaction anyway, you might as well just go back to the belt grinder and do it all by hand. So the better the job that I do here, the less time I spend on the grinder. You know, I've been using the belt grinder for 25 years, so I can fix anything if I screw it up in the machine, presuming I don't just take off way too much metal. But the closer to perfect the blade is coming off the machine, the less time I have to spend in the grinding room. It also makes other things easier, like allowing standardized sheaths to fit perfectly. But the overall point is, each time I make a new design, I try to get closer to perfect. You never get there. It's a continuing battle, but that's kind of part of the fun of this job. So now it's off to the belt grinder to grind off this little tab, fiddle with the bevels if necessary, and do any last cosmetic work to prep the blade for heat treatment. Now, heat treating, the part that hardens and tempers the blade. Again, I could go into this all day. It's a huge subject, but suffice it to say, it goes in a knife-shaped object and comes out an actual knife. Once the blades are hardened and tempered, it's time to think about the handle. For the Shadow 2, I've kind of tested out a bunch of different handle scale designs, which I'll show you guys in later videos, but for the initial release, this is the design I'm going with. Again, back to the CNC machine. I start with huge pieces of black linen micarta that I saw into smaller pieces, and then those pieces I'll drill holes for placement on the CNC machine. Then it just sits there on the Pearson pallet, milling away for between half an hour and an hour, depending on the design and various other factors. Again, depending on the design, it'll use about 6 or 7 different tools. Drills, end mills, ball end mills, countersinks, all this stuff. For seemingly simple little flat objects, these are very complicated parts. You go too slow, they take forever. You go too fast, and you get terrible surface finish. And if you really blast away, you can even end up ripping the micarta out of the fixture. Anyway, here's where you end up. I call these flats. The individual scales then get removed from the flats and then cleaned up on the grinder. They're never perfect coming straight out of the machine. Depending on the look and finish I want, they may go through a tumbling cycle. At a minimum, you got to get the little tabs ground off. Same goes for the blade. I used to do a blasted finish, but now I'm mostly going with tumbled finishes. It actually adds labor doing it this way because I'm blasting then tumbling. But the extra work's worth it because the finish is a little more durable than a pure abrasive blasted finish. Next comes assembly. On the original version of the Shadow, I used a tube rivet to hold the scales on, but the handles of the Shadow 2 will be screwed on. Now, like everything, there are advantages and disadvantages to both, but on balance, I've come around to screws. One of the cool things about screw-on handles is that down the line, the owner can pick up extra scales of a different design. They can customize the look and feel of the knife. Anyway, that's down the line. Right now I'm shipping the blade with these scales only, but my intention is to release some other scales in a few months. Different designs, different colors, all that kind of thing. The Shadow 2 is held together with 3 fasteners, 2 screws, and a little 1/4-inch threaded insert. So you need matching holes in the tang and the handle scales. No problem, just drill a 1/4-inch hole, right? No. Thing is, drills don't give you quite that level of accuracy and repeatability that you need. See, you want a nice clean slip fit for this, no wobble. But you don't want it so tight that you have to bang it in with a hammer either. So I bore these holes to 253 thousandths. The scales, on the other hand, are bored to 257 thou. Same hole, same fastener. Doesn't make any sense, right? Why would you bore them out to different dimensions? Well, the material for the scales is springy. So you try to cut a 253 hole in micarta, it's going to spring back a little, say to 249. And now the insert won't fit. It takes a lot of experimentation to get these little details to work. Do you drill with an oversized drill? Do you drill and then ream? Drill then bore? Bore without drilling? There are trade-offs with each choice you make. Some are more accurate, some are faster, some are slower, all this kind of stuff. Some take more tools or more expensive tools. There's just a lot to it. Anyway, there are a lot more steps involved in making the Shadow 2. Most of them kind of picky and boring, but these are the main ones. And so here it is, the final product. Or this is actually really kind of a mock-up of it. But like I said, I've got a few available for discounted pre-order. Should be done in a couple weeks. Again, I'll have them available at the regular price once they're in stock. But with the pre-order, knocking a few bucks off. Anyway, what I'm showing off here are some prototypes. I'm still tinkering a little bit. And the main batch is in progress. So look for them soon. Hope this gave you a little insight into how, an American manufacturer, small batch manufacturer, is going about making a knife. Anyway, next week I'll be showing the process of making the sheath for the Shadow 2. For those of you who watch a lot of my videos, you'll remember that I did a video maybe, 4 or 5 months ago about a sort of prototype setup for making a sheath using a vacuum press or vacuum system. So next week I'm going to show the evolution of that process and where I finally landed. All right, guys, thanks for watching, and see you soon. Thanks for watching, guys. If you like what we're doing here, please subscribe and make sure that you click on that bell so you get notified of all the latest videos. Want to buy a knife from me? Check out my modern blades at tacticsarmory.com. Digging the channel? You can support our video making efforts on Patreon. You know, I've been banging away on these videos for like 10 years. So I hope you'll show some love for all that hard work. Link in the cards and descriptions. Finally, if you're interested in making Japanese swords, check out my full line of Japanese sword videos where I show how to forge Japanese swords as well as how to polish them and how to make fittings, handles, and scabbards. WalterSorrellsBlades.com.